Welcome into One of One Sports, the only one for your original sports commentary and analysis. We just had an awesome week 5 of college football, so let's break it down. All right, so we're going to start here with the game of the week number 1 because as I'm sure you guys can guess, there's two really big games to talk about here. Also, apologize if there's any audio issues, had some technical difficulties with the microphone. Hopefully, it's all good though. But so game of the week number 1, Oregon defeats Penn State on the road 30-24 in double overtime. What a game. Starting on the Oregon side of things, this is the best win in college football this whole year, in my opinion, that anyone can say they have on their resume. I think it's better than Ohio State, Texas, better than Miami or Texas A&M's win against Notre Dame or Oklahoma's against Michigan. This is the best you can do, in my opinion, this year in college football. To go on the road in this environment, in the whiteout at night with 111,000 people screaming down and win, like, I know it's 30-24. I know it's double overtime, but be as impressive as Oregon was, because until the fourth quarter, to completely stifle Penn State's offense, to completely move the ball. Well, they moved the ball really well and just weren't finishing drives, but it was clear Oregon was the better team, and they didn't even seem to have many problems handling the atmosphere. A couple false starts here and there, sure, but for the most part, this team looked unfazed, which is so impressive from a young team, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But from the Penn State side of things, they just cannot get over the hump. James Franklin now 4-21 versus top 10 teams, and all these things are going to continue to build up, right? So now Oregon joins the conference last year. You're now 0-2 against Oregon. We know the Ohio State, you have the one win, but you know all the losses. Michigan, you got the one win, but you got all the losses. So now you've dropped a level, right? Before you were third to Ohio State and Michigan, now you're clearly fourth to Ohio State, Michigan, and Oregon in this Big Ten hierarchy, and that's just unacceptable. And look, from a larger playoff standpoint, we could talk about, oh, look, Ohio State lost 2 games last year, one to Oregon, one to Michigan. They got in, they still made the run. They didn't even make the Big Ten championship, right? Penn State last year, we saw if you get a good break in the playoff draw, you beat the SMUs and the Boise States, and then one play goes differently against Notre Dame, right? You could have been in the national championship, right? So from all those standpoints, it is possible Penn State has they still have their whole season ahead of them. Maybe they turn this around. They're going to get a shot against Ohio State in a few weeks to turn it around, and the whole narratives could change. But at this point, what reason, from an analysis standpoint, do we have to believe it ever will? Of course, it can change. That's always a possibility. But why would we think it will? Now, I predicted Penn State to win this game, unfortunately. And I even said, I don't think they're as good as Oregon. I think Oregon's the best team in the country. I picked them to win a national championship, right? But I thought, look at the spot. You are the more veteran team in an early week 4 college or week 5 college football game. So Oregon is still a young team developing. You've got all the players coming back, the experienced quarterback, the tailbacks, the O line's experience. Defensively, they've got a ton of experience. So you have the experience edge in a game that's still fairly early on in the season and Oregon's first true road test. I'm not really counting Northwestern. So that's a major advantage. And especially when that road game is in what James Lincoln said was going to be the best environment in the history of college football. And it was a great environment, whiteout at night, obviously a hard place to play. And then you add to that Penn State was off a bye, Oregon was not. So you have the rest advantage, the home field advantage, and one of the best atmospheres in college football with a more veteran team early in the season. If you can't win that big game, why would I think you can win any of them? It's just there's no belief left in me for Penn State to get over this hump. What that means going forward, we'll have to talk about another time. But it is just incredible how close they consistently get and fall short. And in many ways, James Franklin has built the most consistent program in all of college football. They beat everyone that they are better than, and anytime it's comparable, other top tier teams, they lose those games. And that's just the facts at this point. James Franklin admitted it, and Penn State fans have to live with it. Now, how good is Oregon? Well, like I said, I think they're the best team in the country. But when I talked about in the preseason, I said Dante Moore, I think, could win the Heisman. I picked him to finish second, right? Last week, I said he's the best quarterback in college football. So, Dan Lanning, I beat you to it. I saw your press conference. I already called it. And then I talked about the O line, all this infusion of transfer talent. it's all there, right? The receivers though were young. The O-line wasn't going to be gelled immediately. Dante Moore hadn't played in all of last year. It could take him a while to develop, right? Well, it's week 5 and they already have the best win in college football. It's week 5. I talked about by the end of this season, this team would be hitting its stride, right? The receivers are into form. The O line is completely gelled, and Dante Moore has all the experience. Now they're going to be ready to win a national championship. They look like the best team in college football right now, and I think they're only getting better. This Oregon team, to me, is scary, and I think just in a few weeks, we will see them continue to climb. When they play Indiana, I think we'll see they're better. When we see them later at the end of the year when they play Washington, I think we'll see how good this team is. I think they're on an upward trajectory, and yeah, I still believe in them fully as my national title pick. Just wish I would have actually picked them to beat Penn State. And then on the last note, Penn State fans, you know, is the Drew Aller note because he has the tools, as they like to say. Like he's 6'5" and he has a relatively strong arm. He actually moves decently well, but for all his veteran experience, he still seems to make these mistakes in crucial moments. But there was moments when you thought the switch had finally flipped. Down 17-3, you thought the game was over, and then Penn State goes on back-to-back touchdown drives to tie the game. And I thought, this is it. This is the moment where they show that resilience. They show a team that looks like they have the heart of a champion, right? All these veterans came back and they made the big plays to get in this comeback. And then they got into overtime and none of it mattered because they threw the pick. And Drew Aller in the playoff semifinal, he threw the pick. And in these spots, as much as we like to talk about the talent he has and a former 5-star recruit and the veteran experience, in these big spots, he has not delivered. And Penn State continues to look lackluster in the passing game, and it's a quarterback issue. And the receivers still, they look better than last year, but it still doesn't look as elevated as it needs to be. And for the hype around Andy Kotelnicki, the play calling didn't look exceptional offensively. So it's still all the same problems, and it has to be so frustrating. And from an, like I said, an analysis standpoint, Penn State has told us who they are many times. We just have to believe them. Moving on to game of the week number 2, and that is where Alabama also went on the road and beat Georgia 24-21. And this is what I will say is the second best win in college football all of this year. It's funny how these things happen. I remember week 2 earlier, I just said the second best game of the year was Texas A&M Notre Dame, but it was the follow up to the best game of the year, Georgia Tennessee. So it seems like these weeks we get these pairs of these exceptional events happening at the same time. So Alabama, yeah, to go on the road and beat Georgia, which had a 33-game winning streak, the longest in college football, is obviously super impressive. If it was easy to beat Georgia at home, somebody would have done it in the last 33 attempts. So very impressed by that. And there were missed opportunities galore in this game. I mean, you open up with Ryan Williams dropping a touchdown, but you look at Georgia at the end of this game. Gunnar Stockton hits the guy for a touchdown, take the lead 28-24, and he just drops it. And even early in the game, we saw dropped picks. We saw there was just so many mistakes by both teams, and there's going to be a lot both teams can point to and be like, oh, well, if either team had lost, obviously Alabama now won, but I'm sure they'll still critique themselves on tape. But Georgia, you could be like, oh, the drop touchdown, oh, this drop pick. But if Alabama had lost, you would have been pointing to similar things. So there was just a lot of missed opportunities in this game. And then I said last week, another thing I was wrong about, I said, I'm not ready yet to say Kirby Smart has an Alabama problem. Yes, he's 1-6, but only one of those against Kalen DeBoer, and it was at Alabama. Now he's going to be at home, which he's never been able to do against Alabama. They've all been at Alabama or neutral site SEC championship or neutral site national championship. So he's never played him at home, and it's just a one-game sample against Kalen DeBoer. But now your home winning streak is over, and you're 0-2 against Kalen DeBoer, and at this point, yeah, it's undeniable. Like it's undeniable to say James Franklin, you can't argue at this point, oh, James Franklin's not get bad against, top competition. You can't argue that at this point. You cannot argue Kirby Smart doesn't have an Alabama problem. It's just the proof is in the pudding. He clearly does. Like I said, doesn't mean he'll never beat Alabama. He's beat them in a national championship game before, right? It's not impossible. But for the foreseeable future, when they play this game, Alabama has to at least have mental edge, and in an analysis standpoint, Georgia has to do a lot to overcome that hurdle in terms of making us think they will actually beat Alabama the next time around. Moving forward, I think both teams have now clearly established they are going to be a player in the SEC. Georgia already has the win against Tennessee, and look, they were really competitive here, and it seems no one has their number in the SEC quite like Alabama. So if Georgia went on to run the table, I don't think anyone would be really surprised. They're obviously still in the mix. Gunnar Stockton looks really good. The team still looks really good, and they had chances to come back in this one. That fourth down call, I wouldn't have made that call personally. I like just tying the game, but I don't think it's a terrible call. They were rushing, and if you get it, it's a completely different story. I understand that. Obviously, a critical play in the game. Great stop by Alabama. Changes everything if Georgia gets it, right? But Kirby Smart has, like last year in the SEC title game, he calls fake punt. It was great. Years ago when he called a fake punt against Alabama, it was horrible. Lost him the game, right? So Kirby Smart, he's a two-time national champion. He has earned benefit of the doubt when it comes to making these types of decisions, that he'll make the right one more often than not. So not going to critique too much, but obviously a huge play of the game. And then Alabama side, you get this win over Georgia. I'm not forgetting about the Florida State loss, and you've got another big game against Vanderbilt coming up. But Alabama now, I am ready to put them back into contender status like I had where they were at in the preseason. Not going to go, running full in, because if you remember last year, they beat Georgia, and then the next week, they lost to Vanderbilt. So Alabama fans not hoping for deja vu next week. And then from an overall SEC standpoint, I mean, I think they're both in this, but I think it's also wide open. You look at who's left undefeated, Vandy and Missouri, who I think both look really good, but I'm not sure people are ready to put their confidence behind. And then it's Oklahoma, whose starting quarterback is out, and then it's A&M, who yes, they look really good, but as Texas A&M hasn't actually gotten over the hump, similar to Penn State. So are people ready to believe in that team? And then the last one is Ole Miss, who yes looks really good, beat LSU. Are they the favorite at this point now? 3-0 in conference play, maybe. But Texas already lost to Ohio State. Alabama lost to Florida State. Georgia now has a loss. Tennessee lost to Georgia, almost lost to Mississippi State, who, for that matter, or that for as much as we're talking about this, Mississippi State may be getting into this picture. They looked really good against Tennessee. So there's a ton of teams that I think have a pathway to making noise in the SEC. It'll be really fun to watch and kind of discern, is it similar to last year where the SEC had a lot of really compact, close together teams and none of them elevated to championship status except maybe Texas, but they had a problem with Georgia? Or is it kind of like, oh, we have a bunch of teams who are really good, but none of them look like, or none of them have the ability to be contenders. And I didn't even mention LSU, who has the defense, and if the offense gets figured out, could definitely make a run. So there's a ton of teams. We still have a long way of football to play in terms of making out who and who is not a contender in the SEC. Now we can talk about the upset of the week. And first, a victory lap for the debut of Upset Alert, my Thursday show. Last week, we opened with Florida State, where I don't think they were my number one upset alert. I think it was BYU Colorado was the team I had highest on my upset alert scale. For the record, they almost went down last night, so not bad. But second highest was Florida State. I did pick Florida State to still win. I said a walk-off field goal, but I'm still taking a victory lap for alerting. Pretty much, I was very worried about Florida State. Talked about the trap game aspect, which Mike Norvell disputes. I'm not sure if I believe him. Feels a little bit like protesting a bit too much in terms of not looking ahead to Miami. And how could you not, right? The undefeated Miami showdown next week, and you're on a road Friday night game against a Virginia team. I'm sure you were not, at least not everyone on the team, was fully paying attention to Virginia as much as they would have been if it was Miami. You know what I mean? So I think the trap game aspect was there, and I was expecting something like this to occur. But yeah, victory lap for the upset alert segment. You guys probably didn't see it because YouTube seemed to not recommend it to anyone. Rough video performance from that one, but it was great content. You should check it out. If I do it again, we're hitting these upsets, right? We're alerting you to what could go down on these Saturdays. And then the field storming, because I was at a different game. I was at ASU TCU, which I'll talk about at the end of the show. But that field storming was absolutely insane. On one hand, it was incredible how fast they stormed the field. An awesome scene, kind of what you love about college football, the passion and the shot ending where it's just everyone in the middle of the field going crazy, right? It looked awesome. But this was a dangerous field storming with Florida State players still in the end zone as a stampede of student runs. Like this was a bit too far in terms of field storming, and I'm a proponent of field storming. I know a lot of people don't like it, or court stormings in college basketball. I think it's dangerous. I want to keep them. I think it's part of what makes this college sports great. And that's that. But this one was a bit too far, and there's probably going to be some restrictions because Virginia's, the way they have their stadium with the ramp makes it quite easy for things like this to happen. It doesn't because they don't often win games like this, but they did, and credit to the Cavaliers, whose offense looked amazing. Chandler Morris, even with the turnovers, that was the thing about this game because I didn't see much of it because I was at another game in Service and ASU Stadium. Not great. But in terms of the turnover battle, similar issues there. It wasn't like, oh, Virginia got all these turnovers, that's what I want. They did get turnovers, but they had mistakes of their own and were still able to come away on top. And a big part of that was just how effective this offense really is, proving it now against better competition. And on the Florida State side, Deuce Robinson, incredible game, but bobbles the last one. And for all the great catches he made, all the yards, he couldn't reel in that final catch cleanly. And then Florida State loses it on fourth down. Takes a little bit of the what would be the term, I guess, shine. Takes a little bit of the shine off of the Florida State Miami game next week, but still, that's next week. We don't need to talk about that right now. Congratulations to the Cavaliers. Now we can talk about things we got right and wrong. So we'll lead with the Ohio State and Ole Miss games because I got one right and one wrong when I had similar analysis of each. Ole Miss, I talked about why they would beat LSU, and I said, look, LSU's defense looks really good. Actually, it looks great, elite. But I'm not sure it actually is because when you look at their performance against Clemson, their performance against Florida, we now know those teams are not elite offensively. So even if the defense was just very good, they could still have somewhat dominant performances. When you play an offense like Ole Miss's Lane Kiffin's offense with how good Trinidad Chambliss was playing and these receivers on the outside, we could see, is it truly an elite defense or is it just very good? I said it's probably just very good. Ole Miss would still get yards and still get points, and then LSU would have to put it on the shoulders of Garrett Nussmeier, since even with Ole Miss's lack of run defense, I didn't believe in LSU's run game. Also correct about that. And I said Garrett Nussmeier, I don't think he's going to be able to do it with how he's looked this year. So all of that was right. The flip side of that was the Ohio State game where I said, yeah, they look like an elite defense, 5.3 points per game, but we now know Texas offense isn't that great. Washington, their offense is legit. Number one pass efficiency offense in the country. Demond Williams, top 5 quarterback. Jonah Coleman, Denzel Boston are studs as well. They're going to put up points on this Ohio State defense. They did not. Yeah. 6 points for Washington. Incredible performance from the Ohio State defense. And at some point, this bend but don't break approach is just working, right? Because Washington could move the ball in large. There were large stretches of the game where Washington moved the ball well, but couldn't finish drives because this Ohio State defense just gets so good in the red zone when the field shrinks, and that is a skill that makes this defense one of the best in college football, and super impressive to me because to lose all that they did last year from the D line, especially, and still be this good is just truly shocking to me. And they win 24-6 against Washington in a game I thought was going to be much, much closer. So was wrong about that game. Then I was right about Georgia Tech, not in the Wake Forest game, but it's been a roller coaster with Georgia Tech. I said buy stock in them before the Clemson week because they probably would beat Clemson and then they have everything ahead of them. And then I sold stock last week because I said, well, we'll pump the brakes. We don't know if that Clemson win's any good. It may be actually concerning you only beat them on a walk-off field goal. And yes, the schedule's really easy, but we don't know that they're actually that good of a team and they could easily slip up. But then I went on the upset alert segment and said I wasn't worried about them losing to Wake Forest. And they didn't lose, to be fair. But they kind of did because the ACC went out and said the offside call was messed up, which would have been an automatic first down. Wake Forest kneels the ball. Game's over. Georgia Tech lost. So I was right to sell stock, but I was also kind of wrong in that game. So it's a mixed bag with Georgia Tech. And finally, I was wrong about USC, who almost stole one against Illinois. If they had won this game, it would have been because Illinois 2 fumbles inside the 5, which is just brutal. Maybe even closer than that. Illinois left serious points on the board, and USC probably should have been able to steal it, but Lincoln Riley bad management at the end of the game there. Take a shot to the end zone with so much time left, seeing how much his defense had struggled, and he should have experience in this realm with bad defenses before. That he should be you can't leave that much time for Illinois. The defense wasn't going to stop it. There's no surprise whatsoever that Illinois was able to move the ball and get a field goal because defense for USC was struggling all day. And yeah, Malachi Lemon was great, but that was really the only highlight to me for USC. I thought the offense was going to be better, run game was going to be better. And sure, it was a road game and a big time zone shift for USC, but I thought this team was maybe had the potential to move up into contender in the Big Ten, and I'm just not seeing that, especially when we know what Indiana already did to Illinois. So I was wrong about the Trojans. Stock up, stock down. Only got one stock down, and we'll focus on Auburn and A&M first since they played each other. And A&M, I think the stock is up because they're looking like a more complete team. We saw against Notre Dame how good the offense can be, putting up 41 points, and we know Mario Craver and Casey Concepcion have been dynamic on the outside. And Marcel Reed, while completion percentage isn't great, he's been good, and he can hurt you with his legs. The run game also looks very strong. The O-line looks very strong. But the defense had questions with how much they had given up against Notre Dame. But now shutting down Auburn, which to be fair doesn't have the most dynamic offense out there, but still 10 points is really less than that because one of those was essentially, a pick six that got, it wasn't fully a pick six, but got him inside, the 10-yard line. So it wasn't really the A&M defense fault. So to hold Auburn virtually to 3 points, be as dominant as they were, now we're seeing the defense get get figured out for Mike Elko's squad. We know what the offense could be. You combine those and they play complete football, they could be potentially the best team in the SEC with how it's looked. So stock is definitely trending up for A&M. Auburn, it's down because the O-line is bad, and Jackson Arnold doesn't seem to be the quarterback equipped to handle a bad offensive line. He just wants to hold the ball too long. When you give up 10 sacks to Oklahoma and 7 sacks to A&M, it's not all the O-line's fault. It's not all Jackson Arnold's fault. It's in conjunction. But when you have a struggling O-line, the quarterback has to adjust, and Jackson Arnold just isn't doing that, and it's making it nearly impossible to sustain drives when every other play you're getting sacked and losing, 5, 6, 7 yards on these plays, and now you're playing behind the sticks. And then Notre Dame, I gotta say stock up because one, the hardest game left on your schedule is probably USC, and who knows how good they are. Now, the downside of that is is the committee going to give you credit for beating the Boise's, the Navy's, the USC's, on your schedule? Or is it is there not even enough room for Notre Dame to get back into playoff discussion because you lost 2 biggest games? There's a chance of that. But if there's any chance Notre Dame can get back in, they have to play really great football. And that's what they did on Saturday. This offense has an argument. It's a top 5 offense in college football. CJ Carr looks incredible throwing the ball. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are a problem in the backfield. The O-line is really solid, and it seems to be getting better, and those receivers are making a difference. And now we saw the best defensive performance they've had all year without star cornerback Leonard Moore, right? So if the defense, it's kind of similar thing with A&M. The defense continues to improve and they start playing complete football. Notre Dame can be one of the best teams in the country because the offense is that good. And if they get average to above average defense performance, which I don't think they've gotten yet, but we know Arkansas can put up points. We saw it against Ole Miss. We saw it against Memphis. And you held them to 13. So best defense performance of the year. You keep that up, you improve a little, and Notre Dame would be a team a lot of other teams will avoid down the stretch if they sneak into the playoff. Finally, we have the 2-minute drill, and this one, it might be pulling NC State, Virginia Tech run a 4-minute drill. Learned about that yesterday, because there's a lot to talk about here. Starting with the Big 12 whip around, I was at TCU Arizona State. Maybe I'll insert a clip here from a scene of the game. But it was a lot of fun, and I picked TCU to win this game, despite that I was going to be in the ASU student section cheering for them. I did pick TCU to win this game, and when they went up 17-0, I thought, yeah, this feels about right. But then ASU had their largest comeback over a ranked opponent in school history. Talk about what I got wrong and why I got the game wrong. I talked about star receivers being a major player in this game, and I talked about Jordan Tyson's great, but ASU doesn't really have anyone outside of him, and TCU can pay a lot of attention to him, so that'll limit ASU's offense, make them one-dimensional. Meanwhile, TCU passing offense is amazing. You've got Dwyer and you've got Eric McAllister, right? Well, later in the week, then Eric McAllister ruled out with injury, so now they just have Jordan Dwyer. And then TCU looked one-dimensional offensively, and despite ASU only having Jordan Tyson really as a threat, it didn't make a difference. He still torched them and had a great night. So star wide receivers were a major player. I just got it wrong in terms of how I thought that would play out. And then the other thing I want to talk about was just this fourth quarter turnaround, because Sam Leavitt, I don't think looks as good as he was supposed to this year. But 4th and goal, he delivers to tie the game 24-24 on 4th and goal to Jordan Tyson back of the end zone. But if that play didn't work out, ASU would have lost this game likely 24-17, and you would have been looking at a fourth quarter drive chart of turnover on downs from 1st and goal inside the 3. then getting into TCU territory, missing a second field goal of the game, and then another turnover on downs inside the 5. So you'd have lost this game, leaving so many points on the board in the fourth quarter. But you got it, and then the defense got you 2 more possessions, technically strip sack on Josh Hoover, interception on Josh Hoover, and he really fell apart at the end of this game because that interception, it was, you could tell it was coming because the last 2 drives he had thrown 2 passes that looked like they could have been interceptions and were dropped. And look, Sam Levitt had one of his own that was, but he threw it to the end zone and almost got intercepted right to the guy. So Sam Levitt has issues as well, but Josh Hoover's just came at the wrong time. Fumble, bad throws, and TCU just did nothing on offense in the fourth quarter, allowing ASU to mount this comeback and put themselves right back in conversation into this Big 12 discussion. Right now, we'll talk about the rest of the teams, right? Kansas, Cincinnati, absolute shootout. Both teams had like 600 yards of offense or something crazy. It was just up and down, up and down. And Cincinnati got the last laugh, taking the lead 37-34. These look like 2 teams that are really evenly matched. And if any of the top teams on the Big 12 play them on the road, you could see the upset. But neither team to me looks like they're a contender to win the Big 12. But they're both good teams who will win a decent amount of games and can provide a challenge putting up points. Cincinnati, they got Iowa State coming into town next week. Iowa State, I would be very nervous. The offense for Cincinnati is dangerous, and they could definitely pull off an upset. And same thing if you were going to Kansas, right? But neither team I'm taking seriously as like a playoff threat. Speaking of Iowa State, they dominated Arizona. That was battle of undefeated teams in the Big 12. We found out a lot there. Iowa State separates themselves. They're in this top tier. Arizona, though they're improved from last year, they are not in the Big 12 contender status. Rocco Beck looked great. Iowa State in that top tier, like I said, that we're with ASU, with Texas Tech, who I think is even another level ahead. TCU's still there, probably. They're similar with ASU. And I would put Utah there, who crushed West Virginia. Now we don't know how impressive that is. Kansas crushed West Virginia. West Virginia's really bad, and they were playing a backup quarterback. I just really believe in this Utah team going forward in the Big 12. I think Texas Tech had a specific caliber of player on the defensive line that disrupted Utah that the rest of the Big 12 just doesn't have. Elsewhere, Baylor beat Oklahoma State in their first game without Mike Gundy, so Baylor, they could be still in the mix. Kansas State beat UCF, getting their win. But overall, I think the Big 12 separated like Texas Tech up here. Iowa State maybe second, but I got Utah and TCU and ASU still in the mix. And that's another conference similar to the way the SEC is that I think could be really fun in terms of seeing which teams make it at the end if Texas Tech doesn't just pull away, become a clear favorite, because I think there's a decent chance of that. Then Tennessee and Indiana survive upset bids. The Tennessee game was incredible. Talked about on upset alert. Mississippi State had good pass defense, but I thought Tennessee would run the ball well enough and pull away late. But no, Mississippi State was right in this thing to the end, and I thought for a while I was like, I think they're actually going to win this game, and they're going to be kicking themselves because they did a scoop and score and a pick six in this game and still took it to overtime. So Tennessee's defense really saving them here. Now they had turnovers of their own that Mississippi State capitalized on. But yeah, if you're Mississippi State, you gave them 14 points in regulation just from the offense gave them 14 points. The defense only gave them, what would that be? 13 or 17. I can't remember what the exact score was at the end of regulation. But still, the offense did the defense no favors there. Look, Tennessee, you've got some issues in pass defense. Both teams dropped touchdowns. Now I'm thinking about it. I want to talk about that. But, Tennessee, you've got some issues in pass defense. When you get healthier, that could help out. Tennessee, though, you've got some clear issues in the pass defense and overall defense. But I think Mississippi State's a good team. It's tough to win on the road. That's a tough place to play. And you were able to do it, and you stay a one-loss team, which is crucial. So Tennessee, still a major player, and I think similarly of them as I did before. I think they're really good offensively. We now see it carries on to the road. Joey Aguilar was still very good. Obviously, he's got to clean up some of the turnovers, but the offense still very good, and the defense still has some issues. And Mississippi State, they're better than I thought they were. I thought the ASU game might have been a little fluky, but I think this team is just actually really good. We'll see how they perform in big road games, but if a team's going into Mississippi State, you got to take them seriously as a threat to knock off those teams. And then Indiana, same thing. Iowa missed late field goal, take lead 16-13, and then like they didn't take the lead. And then Indiana broke them with a 49-yard touchdown, finally breaking that Iowa defense. They end up winning 20-15. Didn't catch a lot of this game because it was on Peacock. But yeah, I mean, to come off the Indiana win, you probably were in a potential letdown spot on the road against Iowa defense that's really good. But Kirk Cignetti and co win. You get to the bye week, and now after the bye week, you will face Oregon, where we will find out a lot about Indiana. So we'll talk about that one when the time comes. And then I already talked about the wide open SEC, but just to really hammer down the point, like Vandy, we'll see him play Alabama next week, but Missouri, are we sure, or do we know how good Missouri is? I don't think so. Ole Miss, you'll get Washington State, and then the schedule, you got Georgia, maybe Oklahoma if John Mateer's back. What is Oklahoma without John Mateer? When is John Mateer coming back? Is Texas going to figure out their offensive issues? There's just so many question marks across the SEC. You don't know who's going to emerge, who's going to fall, and that's really what's going to make college football so great this year and every year is the unpredictability of it. With that being said, that is all I have from week 5 of college football. An absolutely packed weekend. There was so much to talk about. If I missed anything, feel free to ask a question in the comments, or maybe I'll cover it later in the week. We'll be back Tuesday with updated rankings and predictions for next week, and then we'll be back Thursday as well. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe. Until next time.